Hi everyone. So yeah, thank you for being here. Even when it's like a national event today. I think we're gonna start by talking about the farewell for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna ask more questions in general about Chinese diaspora and kind of diasporic storytelling, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So I just wanted to ask what resounded with both of you upon watching or rewatching the film.
Yeah. Oh my God. So much resonated with me. Um, I think generally, I think a lot of it was that kind of that sense of being caught between the familiar and the strangeness, of the place that you've left behind, and also that sense of in betweenness as well, and the sort of like navigating the dualities, sort of like straddling two cultures. And of course, the kind of like family dynamics, sort of like the reunion with the extended family. And watching that just now, I was such an emotional wreck. That feeling of leaving, the country of your origin in a way, the home of your ancestors. And for me, that farewell at the end, saying goodbye to your family, that just kills me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have like quite a personal connection with the film as well for another reason because the city where the director is from is pretty close to my own hometown as well, from the northeastern part of China. It's actually quite refreshing to see like a northern city depicted in the film in the diaspora context. But yeah, I've also like lots of family members since I've been here in the UK, so that's just really I can relate to as well. And the sense of the familiar and the strange that Jennifer was talking about, yeah, that was like a lot to navigate. I think the director did a really good job at depicting that awkwardness as well when you're being surrounded by your relatives who are pestering about your private lives. It's very typical of like northeastern families who are quite known to be quite loud or overly hospitable. Yeah, and also that language barrier. Even though she does speak Mandarin, her Mandarin wasn't that great, which is also something that even though I do speak the language, but I had lost the dialect since I moved away to like a different part of the country when I was younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also interesting for me just like watching it again and kind of seeing kind of also the representations of grief and how, both the elders and Billy are kind of figuring out what is the way to kind of deal with these emotions without really speaking to each other in a like way where they meet in the middle. I don't know, I feel like there's a sense of, there's a grief where you think you have to hold the burden on, or there's a grief where it's supposed to give agency to the grandmother, or kind of grieving for all the time that they lost with the grandmother, which is kind of implied in that, especially in the banquet scene. Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask about what did you think about the depiction of grief and kind of these generational differences that emerge in their response to how they should deal with their grief for their grandmother, and also this responsibility of whether to tell her or not.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it was really interesting. What I really like about the film was the fact that it's taking a very empathetic gaze on the kind of conflict between the value systems of two very different cultures. When I was kind of first watched it, I mean, there was a part of me, obviously Billy being the person that we are kind of that kind of channels our experience in a way, that kind of the unfairness of a personal decision being taken for on your behalf, and that question of that. But I thought the film navigated that really, really well, in the sense that it kind of enabled you to see the bigger picture from the family's point of view, where I think the uncle says that, in the East, your person one is part of the whole. And I think it is a very nuanced look at that. And I think it's also, a lot of it is also kind of burdened with the guilt of having left home and being part of a transnational community. I think all that kind of piles on. It's multi-layered, and there's no easy answer, and I don't think the film offers us an easy answer, but it offers the bridge to understand what the other side is offering, and I think that kind of mitigates the family differences and generation. I don't think it's a generational gap. I think it's more of a cultural gap. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess in my reading of the film, it's the generational difference is quite potent as well. I guess from my own personal experience of growing up in China as well, kind of like that older generation are more accepting or embracing of the idea of facing death rather than, and they're quite skeptical of like Western medicine or like modern medical technologies in terms of if you get terminally ill, they would rather be spending the last of their times with their families in their own home rather than maybe on a hospital bed. Yeah, and it's like lots of tensions, of course. Yeah. I think that in the film, the grandmother also spoke about what they want to do with her ashes, and in my experience, it's quite common for that older generation to be speaking about that as a part of everyday conversation, whereas it's actually the younger generation who found it a bit harder to let go. Like they have a lot more to lose or to hold on to. Yeah, I don't know if Cici or Jennifer has felt anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting that I think, the grandma was trying to protect her Billy in the beginning when they had the phone call by reassuring her that she's, not at the hospital. And then at the end, she's still like reassuring her whole family that she's fine. It's almost like she's protecting them from the grief. And that last shot with the taxi pulling away evokes the sense, of course she knows herself. And of course she knows that she's sick, and they're all kind of playing this performance because they don't get to see each other that often. And you're kind of trying to create this perfect memory that's like kind of filled with all of these things that each person knows and they all know but goes unsaid, which I think plays into Chinese family dynamics in a really potent way, the kind of unspoken but the known. And I think I think that's really interesting. And I think Chinese family and diasporic family dramas are really appealing to East and Southeast Asian audiences. I feel like in the past few years there's been Everything Everywhere All at Once. Recently there's been a Thai blockbuster called Making Millions Before Grandma Dies. I think that's been like selling out all over Thailand, and I think there's this real sense of how do we deal with our like the things we inherit and the things that go unspoken in our family. And like I think film is kind of the perfect medium because it's a visual form where so much of the unspoken is just left in that kind of similar way and kind of seen through the body and seen through these other aspects, which I find really interesting. I was wondering why you think like kind of family dramas appeal so much to diasporic audiences, especially Chinese diasporic audiences.
Can I just, before answering this, looking back to what you said earlier about the fact that maybe the grandmother had known all along, it's all kind of performance of, to show that how they really care for each other. I think that's my reading as well. We do have like I'm not too sure about the cancer saying, but we do have a saying that loosely translates to like every time we meet each other, it could be the last time. And I think the older generation and kind of understands this better than anyone, especially with the grandmother who had been through war and like famine, like lots of difficult historical trauma as well. Yeah, I think it also in Chinese families there's that idea of every time you meet, it could be a way of saying goodbye in a sense. Yeah, and then in terms of family narratives, I guess family is at the core of the diaspora experience. It's a lot about like when researching for a film season that we did last year with Science Screen, we were looking at a lot of films that has a lot of central themes around coming of age stories or films depicting cultural identity and all the tensions that come with that. it all ties back to the families. And I think it's also like the universality of families and how it can relate to lots of different audience members who might be outside of that specific community. Yeah.
Yeah, so are we talking about your question? I mean, there's so much to unpack. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? There's just so much to unpack.
I think just say anything. Yeah.
I mean, I think about the whole thing about what you're saying about the kind of, I think there's also the kind of idea that, you know, I think for me it's very, it's got a real, it's very philosophically very, very Chinese, very Eastern for me. You know, the whole idea about the relationship between the mind and the body, you know, and actually protecting the grandmother by not telling her about that. I mean, that could protect her because, you know, if she doesn't know that she has an illness, then there wouldn't be a sort of like steep decline downwards. Which I think there might be some value or truth behind that because Lulu Wang's grandmother is still living, right? Apparently. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I guess interesting that this film, she made the film and like they weren't telling her grandma at the time, and she was coming to set and, you know, they would pretend that this wasn't happening as well. So they were kind of like playing this performance on set as well. So it feels like the whole film is like an attempt to work through this problem for Lulu Wang.
Yeah, but I also feel like what's really interesting watching that as well is that element of control as well. I mean, the grandmother is very bossy, but then there's always an element of control at every single level, even within Billy's family as well. And then, yeah, but yeah, I think it's, for me, I mean, the film has just got so much going on, even if you look at Billy's mum and dad, as opposed to, you know, the uncle's family as well. Yeah
definitely. And you know, it's great to see such a big cast have such like individual personalities come through, which I feel like it's quite rare to pull off like in an epic kind of way.
And going back to your question, why do you think that Chinese diasporic audiences like family drama? I mean, I don't know. I'm not an academic, but I can posit a few theories, if I may. I think family dramas is a gold mine for great drama because there's always conflict in family, you know, secrets and lies and stuff like that. But I think there's also that kind of cultural proximity, you know, for a diasporic audience, in terms of the notion of the proximity of culture, of the linguistic factor. For me, it was lovely hearing the language, hearing Mandarin being spoken, and also observing certain touches that is only possible through a non-white gaze. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think for me as well, why I can only speak about me as a part of the diasporic community here in the UK. I think we don't see that represented on screen a lot of the time. We don't see, you know, Chinese characters or British Chinese characters taking a central role. And all the nuances, the humanization of all the stories is just not represented. So when something like that comes along, I think that's something that it creates a real yearning for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I also find, the certain touches, you know, like when they're playing with the food at the wedding banquet, it's such a familiar sensation. It's such a, like, you can sense it. It's very sensorial. There's a theorist, Laura Marks, who writes about kind of diasporic cinema having to deal with the senses more than with the sight, because the senses is how people remember their homelands in diaspora, through like touch, smell, everything. And I find this to be quite a sensorial film, you know. You have the massage room where you can almost imagine the heat of the like water and then the food and the senses and like these textures of like all the carpets and things.
Oh, and those amazing waiters, you know, standing in a row, you know, that just conjures up so all my memories when I was in Beijing last. And it's just all that would appear strange to a Western audience perhaps, but for us is almost, I felt that was a real strain of familiarity. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of looking back to the question about family dramas, I think a lot of those films deal with like intergenerational relationships as well. But I also want to ask like a question back to you two about whether you think there might be some drawbacks or limiting aspects to only kind of framing diaspora experience within the family frame, because there's the risk of being stereotypical depictions of like the older generation of your parents who are conservative, and also in contrast to like the kids who are liberal and westernized. And I think it can risk of creating like binaries of like Western versus Eastern, or like collective versus individualistic values and that kind of thing. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I personally, if we were talking about the farewell, I think it kind of bucks all the stereotypes that we have. I think Grandma Nai Nai is such a badass. You know, I mean, she's just so cool. Do you know what I'm saying? It's none like the grandmothers that you get on British television screen. You know, I hear what you're saying. You know, I think if a story is being rooted in specificities and the kind of idiosyncrasies, it kind of transcends that. I didn't feel that played to any form of stereotypes, because we have Billy's father as well struggling with the whole notion of withholding the truth from Nai Nai, and then that conversation in the hospital says, "Oh, isn't that illegal?" You know, yeah. So
I guess just in terms of second generation immigrant stories in general, and not the film. Yeah.
I think there's so much specificity which we risk to lose sometimes, which is maybe one of the problems I find with more and more films that come out about kind of Chinese diaspora. And I think maybe the problem with Everything Everywhere All at Once, personally, I found was, we had like the idea of like, the traumatized mom is only mean because she's traumatized, and therefore she is forgiven because, she has also, I don't know, I just found it a bit, there's a reason why like an Asian woman has to be forgiven for being mean, whereas I find, maybe it's more interesting that she is maybe a bit of a villain, and that's okay, and we have to deal with like the discomforts of that, and there's maybe no reason, like, I don't know, I find that, I think it's like really complex, and the way we talk about it has to be really specific, and be careful whether it's, are we just trying to market to an audience of nostalgia, or are we trying to create a story that's actually original and based on a really specific kind of narrative. I
totally agree. Everything Everywhere All at Once has got nothing on the farewell.
I think we're going to open up questions to the audience now as well.
Hi, can you hear me? I just had a question about the conversation between the two women at dinner about the decision to send the son to college in America, and kind of what you made of the trade-offs that were being discussed in terms of wanting to keep the children close by versus like wanting more opportunities for them, and then also the discussion about whether there were in fact more opportunities in America or in China.
Wow. I guess my take on that is I guess it's quite close to my own personal experience in terms of I guess coming from my parents' perspective, they sent me here to the UK for education, but probably didn't expect me to hang around after for so long. So there's like that tension between wanting more for your kids and then kind of also in a way pushing them away further from yourself. Yeah. Anyone want to comment on?
Oh, I can't comment. I'm not from China, but I can kind of posit my take on it. I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because China is a huge country, the size of a continent, and yet there's, I think, about 10 or so years ago, there was that whole idea that there are more opportunities in China. In fact, there were people that I know that actually went back to China. But I think I also have family who want to send their children to abroad to further their studies. I think it's the whole idea about broadening their horizon. I think if you're talking about opportunities, I think it's about a much more rounded opportunity. I think what's really interesting was the story, the anecdote that was being shared at the dinner table about how, you know, the pastor at the church gives the key to the mum, which the implication is that something like that would never ever have happened in China. And I think about in terms of opportunities, I think it just depends on what you want to do. You know, I think a career in the arts, probably not. You know, I mean, it just depends on what you want to do personally.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I was trying to trouble that narrative of like, is life better when you leave? When you kind of look at Billy's life and you're wondering, you know, would your life be better in China? And she has that moment where she looks at the woman inside playing in the mahjong room, like, could this be my life? Or I guess, you know, maybe you're working in the arts in a more free way, but are you also being paid equally? Are you being, I don't know, there are loads of questions. Are you like facing racism? Are you being sold as your cultural card as a way of making it in this country? A lot of those questions come up, and I don't think it's simple to answer. But actually Hester and I programmed Perfume Nightmare by Kidla Tahimik, which kind of I recommend watching, which deals with it in a really interesting way, where he is from the Philippines, from a village, and then he goes abroad to Paris with his employer, and kind of like the ideas around Western superiority and Western kind of progressiveness kind of crash and fall. Like, what does progress actually lead to? Like, does having a nice apartment mean that ultimately you'll be happier? Or like kind of debunking these like neoliberal notions and neocolonial notions of moving away.
Yeah, I think there's something very poignant as well. And again, there's all these dualities in there. Is the fact that Billy has lost her language, which kind of is something that she mourns for and she grieves for, the fact that, you know, she's unable to communicate with members of her family, and also she feels untethered in terms, you know, in relation to her culture. So I suppose it is quite a complex subject to kind of navigate.
Definitely. And when she cries with her mother, you know, she didn't have a choice of her life being uprooted, and, you know, all the what ifs is also what she mourns of. She never had the agency again to choose how to live her life in China. Like, she didn't have the agency to choose to tell her grandmother and to grieve together and say goodbye properly.
Yeah, I think the other conversation that Billy had with her mom about how if like every time that they went back home, it's like everything's different and feels like there's lots of gaps. As like you have this mental picture of what your home is like or your family is like, but then as time passes, when you go back, there's like these gaps that can't really be bridged or fill in, and it's about how you deal with those gaps as well. Yeah, especially in the city where it's set, Changchun, which has gone through really rapid transformative changes in the past 2 decades as well. Yeah, all of the homes that they had lost. And also what she said about never got the chance to say goodbye to her grandfather. That's like, I think, a bit closer to what most people experience when they lost a loved one. They may not actually have the chance to, or the luxury to say goodbye as well. I think the fact that the film was filmed in 2019, just before the pandemic, was quite significant as well. I feel like watching back now, it's almost like a fairy tale that you got the chance to say goodbye. Yeah, I think maybe that's why it's going to continue to move so many people as well.
Definitely. Are there any other questions?
So actually, I was just wondering if you thought about the film as a bit more universal, not because of course it is rooted in like Chinese culture, but I was just wondering because I could possibly imagine such thing happening in Europe, maybe not from like the legal point of view, but there might be families in Europe which would prefer to hide truth in certain situations, and I'm just wondering, how do you think you could read it as a more universal film and more not really as much rooted in culture as in like more as a story of a particular family which just happens to function in this way? Because I also think that the characters they weren't like really representative of culture. They were very very original, especially like the grandma and the main character. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it is. You can say it's very specific experience. Because the filmmaker is actually based on her own family story as well. But I guess the fact that it's done so well in terms of box office proves that it's really transcends just a Chinese immigrant story, but it has like lots of universality that could relate to audience.
Well, I agree. I think the universality came from exactly what you said about the specificity of it, and I think that's also partly the reason why Lulu Wang had so much trouble trying to get the film financed and made in the very first place. And I think that's a really good point you made, because for me, watching it, I felt there was something the tenet of truth is so strong in it. And I think if we kind of like just say that I think it's about marketing. If you say it's a Chinese immigrant story, yeah, but it is based on a true story. But there's also the danger of racializing it, because I think, secrets and lies in families that cut across all races. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't think that it can be representative of one culture, and I think the strength of the storytelling lies in its originality and it is being so rooted in truth. I think that was what makes it universal.
Sorry, just a very quick note to say that there are so many directors that have done amazing things, like Thomas Vinterberg, like with Another Round, that have said so many times that the more specific you are and the more you don't try to appeal to a universal audience, the more paradoxically, the more universal your story gets. So you don't need to worry about being universal. You just need, I think, to stick to your truth and your own experience, and then it becomes universal somehow.
Yeah. I want to end on, just one last question for both of you, which I've been thinking about, is kind of the question of inheritance in this film. The film is about kind of, what do you inherit from your home that you take with you and the values you carry and, like mourning for the past, but also how do you try to keep these things alive and create your own kind of inheritance in your practice? Big question.
It's a huge question. I think for me, if I may use the film as a reference, I love the last shot, Billy in New York in doing the exercise that her grandmother, teaches her, expelling toxins by saying "ha," and I love that, because that is, I think that your inheritance is something that you carry within you. I think it's not something that is conscious. And I think that's something that you kind of, it could be historical inheritance, inheritance of language, inheritance of trauma even, or whatever, but it's something that you carry through you as an artist, and that comes through your practice in an unconscious way, but it will inform every decision that you make.
Yeah, I think for me, it also raises the question of my own identity as an artist, as an Asian artist, and how I fit in the UK as well. I guess my own personal research have been recently focused on looking into the history of Chinese immigration in the UK and kind of relating to their experiences and how the difficulties and challenges that they had and it's always also been like a inward journey for myself as well. Yeah, and I think in the future I'd be interested in on like a more practical level to look at my own family's history as well in the northeastern part, which has a really complex history with Japan and some of other countries as well, to as another way of relating to my family's story. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll answer the question as well, I guess. Yeah, I think it's interesting thinking about inheritance because I'm Chinese Ugandan, so and then now I've moved to the UK, so there's kind of a triple movement there, and I'm kind of really interested in kind of the histories that develop as we live. Like, I think I'm a product of a very recent historical kind of migration movement, and you know, how do we build archives around that, especially with my family, who's not so, they're quite like pragmatic. They don't, when I say I want to build this archive, they're like, okay, what do you mean by an archive? And kind of,
Do you make money?
Yeah, and then they're like, yeah, are you gonna make money from that? Or is this like a hobby? And so kind of thinking about how do we archive the present, how do we archive the everyday, and what like joins that part of the archive. So like being less practical and being more of a hoarder is what I'm thinking of as part of my practice. Thank you. I think that's all we have time for. I think, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.